In July 2025, former President Donald Trump reignited North American trade tensions, sending shockwaves through both political and economic circles. The announcement came unexpectedly, catching many off guard and immediately dominating headlines across the continent. With a bold ultimatum, Trump threatened to impose a sweeping 35% tariff on all Canadian goods entering the United States, setting a firm August deadline for action. The threat was not just rhetoric, it was a direct challenge to Canada's economic interests and a signal that the era of trade wars was far from over. At the heart of his demand was Canada's dairy industry, a sector Trump accused of hiding behind tariffs as high as 400%. He claimed these barriers protected Canadian farmers at the expense of fair competition, making it nearly impossible for American dairy products to compete in Canadian markets. Trump argued these policies unfairly hurt American farmers, distorting competition and driving down prices at home. For many in rural America, the message resonated. Years of frustration over limited access to Canadian markets had reached a boiling point. By framing dairy as a matter of U.S. economic security, Trump aimed to rally his political base and put maximum pressure on Canada's government. He painted the dispute as a fight for American jobs and fairness, stoking nationalist sentiment and promising to stand up for U.S. workers. American dairy producers have long viewed Canada's market as both unfairly protected and highly lucrative. Many U.S. farmers see the Canadian system of quotas and tariffs as a major barrier to growth, fueling calls for tougher action from Washington. Trump's threat was a calculated move: force Canada to open its dairy market or face economic pain. The message was clear: compromise or risk a trade war that could ripple through industries far beyond dairy. The timing was strategic, coming just before a key review of the USMCA trade pact. With the agreement's future on the line, both sides faced mounting pressure to find common ground or risk unraveling years of trade cooperation. Trump's message was unmistakable. Dairy concessions were now non-negotiable, and the livelihoods of workers on both sides of the border hung in the balance. The stakes were high, with thousands of jobs and billions in trade at risk. The stage was set for a high-stakes confrontation over milk, cheese, and butter, products that had become symbols of a much larger struggle over trade, sovereignty, and the future of North American cooperation. Canada saw Trump's aggressive trade tactics coming from miles away and decided to act before the storm hit. Anticipating a new wave of pressure from Washington, Canadian leaders moved swiftly to protect their most sensitive industries. In late June, Parliament passed Bill C-202, a landmark law that forbids any government from signing a trade deal that would weaken Canada's supply management system. This was not just another piece of legislation, it was a bold, preemptive strike to shield Canadian farmers and producers from foreign demands. The law blocks any future concessions on dairy, poultry, and eggs, no matter how intense the pressure from trading partners becomes. For Canadian farmers, this was a guarantee that their livelihoods would not be used as bargaining chips in international negotiations. The message to Washington was crystal clear: these sectors are now legally untouchable. No American demand, no matter how forceful, could pry open Canada's protected markets. The bill passed with rare, unanimous support from all parties, a sign of just how deeply supply management is woven into Canada's political fabric. It was a moment of unity in a usually divided chamber. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc's office made it official. Supply management was off the table, period. There would be no debate, no exceptions, and no backroom deals. By enshrining this protection into law, Canada fundamentally changed the dynamic of any future trade talks. There would be no negotiation on these sectors, only a standoff, with Canada standing firm. The United States, used to getting its way, was told in no uncertain terms to look elsewhere for concessions. The door to Canada's dairy, poultry, and egg markets was now locked tight. Canada's move ensured that the coming talks would be a clash of absolutes, not a search for middle ground. The stakes were higher, and the lines were drawn. In the face of mounting U.S. pressure, Canada built a legal fortress, one designed to withstand any trade siege from the south, no matter how fierce the attack. To grasp Canada's hardline stance, you need to understand supply management. Since the 1970s, this system has controlled dairy, eggs, and poultry through three pillars: media group, archival footage of 1970s Canadian dairy farm, diagram showing supply management pillars, close-up of production quota chart, border customs inspection with dairy products as stock distribute equally, production quotas, price controls, and import restrictions. Farmers get stable prices and protection from global market swings. The most controversial pillar, sky-high tariffs on imports above strict quotas, locking out foreign competition. This system is fiercely defended by a powerful dairy lobby and all major political parties, especially in Quebec and Ontario. For many, it's about food sovereignty and supporting family farms, a political third rail. That's why no leader dares to touch it. This standoff is just the latest chapter in a long and often contentious history of US-Canada dairy disputes. For generations, dairy has been a flashpoint in the broader trade relationship between these two neighbors, with each side fiercely defending its own farmers and market interests. For decades, the US has argued that Canada's supply management system, designed to protect Canadian dairy farmers, unfairly blocks American exports and limits access to a lucrative market just across the border. American producers have long felt shut out, while Canadians insist their system is essential for stability and fair prices at home. Even after the signing of the USMCA, which was supposed to modernize trade rules and open new doors, disputes quickly flared over how Canada allocated import quotas. The US claimed that Canada was still finding ways to keep American dairy out, using technicalities and loopholes to maintain their protective barriers. Initial rulings from trade panels favored the US, forcing Canada to make some adjustments. But later, other panels sided with Canada, deepening American frustration and fueling accusations that the process was inconsistent and slow to deliver real change. American officials saw Canada as playing by the letter, not the spirit, of trade agreements, complying with technical requirements while still keeping barriers high. This perception only increased the sense of injustice among US dairy producers and their political allies. The dispute resolution process designed to settle these conflicts seemed unable to break through what many in the US called Canada's dairy wall. Each new ruling or negotiation brought more protests and more frustration, with little real progress. This long history of frustration and stalemate set the stage for President Trump's new, aggressive tactics. He promised to fight for American farmers and wasn't afraid to use tough rhetoric or threats of tariffs to get results. The US now believes that only maximum pressure, through public confrontation, legal challenges, and the threat of trade penalties, will force real change from Canada and finally open the border to American dairy. The result is a cycle of escalation, with each side digging in deeper, unwilling to back down. Tensions rise, and the dispute seems to have no end in sight. Now all eyes are on the 2026 USMCA review, which looms as the next major battleground in this decades-long dairy war. Both sides are preparing for another round, knowing that the outcome could reshape the future of North American dairy trade. The US isn't alone in criticizing Canada's dairy protections. Major exporters like New Zealand have also filed complaints, arguing Canada's system violates trade agreements. These countries say Canada's quota system favors domestic processors and blocks high-value imports. The fight has reached the World Trade Organization, with hopes of forcing Canada to reform. Critics argue Canada can't champion free trade while walling off its own market. The pressure is now global, not just bilateral. Canada faces mounting calls to open its dairy sector or risk international isolation. Not all Canadians support the new law. Export-oriented farm groups warn that refusing to negotiate on dairy could provoke US retaliation against other sectors like beef and grain. The Canadian Cattle Association and Agri-Food Trade Alliance argue the law undermines Canada's reputation as a fair trading partner. They fear Canada's broader economy could suffer for the sake of protecting a small, powerful dairy lobby. Critics say Canada can't expect open markets abroad if it won't discuss its own barriers. The law, they warn, risks sparking a trade war Canada can't win. The debate reveals a deep divide between political symbolism and economic reality. As of October 2025, the US-Canada standoff is locked in stalemate. Trump's tariff deadline has passed, but no action yet. Both sides are waiting. Canada's new law makes dairy concessions illegal, turning negotiation into a test of will. If Trump imposes tariffs, it could trigger a trade war, disrupt supply chains, and hurt both economies. Alternatively, negotiators might find compromise elsewhere, like digital taxes, to avoid disaster. For now, it's a waiting game, each side betting the other will blink first. The 2026 USMCA review is the next major flashpoint. The world watches as two allies risk economic chaos over milk and cheese. Neither side seems willing or able to back down. The outcome will shape North American trade for years to come.